Not every phrase a woman repeats is the truth sometimes. It's an echo of her unhealed wounds. The real danger isn't what she screams, it's what she repeats, casually, charmingly, without pause. Have you ever realized that some of the most common things women say quietly erode your peace? Today's video isn't about blaming women, it's about recognizing the emotional power of the words they use again and again. Phrases like "I'm just being honest," "if you can't handle me at my worst," or "I know my worth" often sound bold, empowering, but when used without self-awareness, they become weapons, tools to manipulate, confuse, and control. Stoic wisdom teaches us it's not the chaos that destroys you, it's your reaction to it. And when you become fluent in the hidden language of emotional manipulation, you don't fall into the same traps twice. If you've ever felt like you were constantly proving yourself, apologizing more, then speaking, or shrinking just to keep the peace, then stay with me. Because once you learn to hear the meaning behind the phrase, you don't just hear her, you hear yourself again. And if you're ready to trade confusion for clarity, and emotional guessing games for grounded wisdom, subscribe now. This channel is for men and women who choose growth, peace, and truth over noise. Have you ever been told, "If you truly loved me, you just know what I need"? Not asked, not expressed, just expected to read their mind. At first, it sounds poetic, romantic even, like love should come with this magical ability to feel every unspoken desire, decode every silence, and always know what the other person needs without them ever saying a word. But let me ask you something, is love a connection, or is it a test? Because when love becomes about passing invisible exams, where the answers are hidden, and the rules change without warning, that's not intimacy. That's manipulation wrapped in emotional mystique. I want you to imagine this. You're standing in a quiet kitchen. The person you love is distant, but says nothing. You ask, "Is something wrong?" And the reply comes cold, "If you loved me, you'd already know." Your chest tightens not because of what was said, but because of what it implies. Suddenly, love isn't something you give, it's something you have to prove, again, and again, and again. I once met a man named Michael, mid-50s, kind, thoughtful, former school counselor. He told me over coffee one day, "I spent 10 years of my marriage guessing what she needed, guessing when I had failed, guessing what word would finally make her smile again." He smiled as he said it, but there was sadness behind his eyes. You see, Michael didn't have a problem expressing love. He wrote notes, brought flowers, showed up, but every time he missed one unspoken cue, every time he failed to just know, the silence came, the coldness, the guilt trip. And here's what he told me that broke my heart. "I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of being punished for not being psychic." Now, I'm not saying communication should always be easy, and I'm definitely not saying one person is always to blame. But this idea, this belief that love must be proven through mind reading, is dangerous. Psychologists call it expectation projection. It's when one partner silently assigns a task to the other without saying a word, and then measures their love based on how well they perform it. But Stoic philosophy saw it earlier, and perhaps more clearly. Epictetus wrote, "We are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them." The modern version, it's not what happens in the relationship, it's what we assume it means. When someone says, "If you loved me, you just know," they're not asking for love. They're demanding validation on their terms, at their timing, without ever having to be vulnerable enough to ask for it directly. But vulnerability, that's where real love lives. I want you to think about this. Have you ever felt like you were in trouble, but didn't know why? Like the person you care about most is disappointed in you, but won't tell you what you did? That's what emotional landmines feel like. And in that moment, your brain isn't working on connection or clarity, it's working on survival. You're analyzing past conversations, you're decoding silence, you're tiptoeing around tension. And every time you fail to guess right, the message is the same: you don't love me enough. But that's not love, that's emotional debt interest. Charged daily, love isn't proven through perfect guesses. It's shown in effort, in presence, in conversations that feel clumsy but honest. It's not, "You should just know." It's, "Can I tell you what I need right now?" Because here's the truth. Even the most attuned, emotionally intelligent, spiritually grounded partner can't read minds, and expecting them to isn't romantic, it's unreasonable. We grow up with stories, movies, books, songs where the ideal partner just knows. They show up with flowers without being asked. They sense a mood shift without a word. They rescue you from your own silence. But the problem with that fantasy, it kills real relationships, because real love happens in reality, where people sometimes say the wrong thing, where they miss signs, where they're distracted, or tired, or human. The Stoics remind us again and again, clarity is kindness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. In relationships. That means stop measuring love by what someone should know, and start building love on what both of you are willing to say. Because real love doesn't grow in silence. It grows in dialogue, in the messy, brave act of speaking needs aloud, even when it feels awkward. Especially when it feels awkward. If you've been in a relationship where you constantly had to guess, where love felt more like a test than a safe space, you are not alone. But I want you to know this, you don't have to keep earning love through exhaustion. You don't have to play a game where the rules keep changing. And you don't have to be a mind reader to be worthy of love. You just have to be willing to listen, to ask, to show up with humility, not perfection. And you deserve a partner who believes the same. So if you're tired of walking on eggshells, if you're ready to trade confusion for clarity, if you believe, like I do, that love should be grounded, not guessed, because here, we don't punish silence. We break it with truth, with courage, and with kindness. 2. You're not man enough. No yelling, no aggression, just quiet confidence, but beneath it lies a torrent, not of emotion, but of calculated intent. These words aren't spoken to uplift. They're offered to destabilize. I want you to pause and imagine this. You're sitting across from someone you care about. Maybe after a long day or a misunderstanding, you speak up, set a boundary, offer an opinion, share a need, and her eyes sharpen, voice calm but unwavering. You're not man enough. Her voice doesn't break, but the silence that follows, that's the crack in your confidence. Because it's not a question, it's a verdict, a quiet demand for submission. Let me tell you about Daniel, a man in his early 40s, former college football coach. He was generous with his time, loyal in love, and quiet in his strength. After his divorce, he met someone he thought was different, intelligent, engaging, someone he trusted. But after a few months, he noticed a pattern. He'd say something gentle, reasonable, like, I need a few hours this weekend to recharge. She'd raise an eyebrow and say, not man enough to handle a date night? Or when he suggested a disagreement shouldn't define them, her voice would drop. You're not man enough to stand up to me. It was always a challenge, a prodding, like testing his strength, not to connect, but to provoke. By the time he reached out, he told me, I feel like I walk on glass. Every time I try to be honest, I'm made to feel weaker. And the stronger I try to be, the less I recognize who I am. There's a psychological tactic at play here. It's called identity-based provocation. Instead of attacking you directly, it undermines your sense of self, masquerades as banter, tests, or even romance, but really, it's manipulation. And Stoicism, it foresaw this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, to live happily is an inward power. It's not awarded by others' definitions of strength or weakness. When someone labels you not man enough, they're not defining your manhood or your strength. They're questioning your boundaries, your self-respect, and your emotional geography. And if your response is to fight back, you're stepping into their arena on their terms. You're reacting, you're proving, you're subscribing to a story they scripted. A Stoic reaction. You withdraw not out of defeat but clarity. You say nothing, because you know, your presence is your answer. Have you ever felt the same tightness in your chest, the subconscious question that pops up, am I enough? Because words like those aren't merely heard, they're absorbed. They grow roots in your mind. They echo when you're alone and self-doubt whispers. But the problem isn't the echo, it's the space we give it to breathe. So I want to ask you, have you ever taken a pause, really stopped and asked yourself, why do I feel so depleted after the conversation? Because feeling less of yourself isn't always catalyzed by dramatic conflict. Sometimes it's sown with subtle insults and quiet emasculation. Now, here's what working on yourself looks like through a Stoic lens. Notice the pattern. Even the calmest provocateurs have patterns. Recognize when this phrase appears over and over. Detach from the bait. Don't engage. Don't rise to prove them wrong. Silence isn't weakness, it's clarity. Anchor your identity. Define manhood by your internal values, not external. Validation. Marcus Aurelius again. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Choose your presence. You are strong when your calm remains unshaken even in provocation. Boundaries are armor. If someone persistently uses identity as leverage, you don't have to prove anything. You politely and firmly step away. Let me be clear, this isn't avoidance. It's intelligence. This isn't detachment. It's alignment. A friend of mine, David, once shared a story. He'd invited his partner to a speaking event. He was hosting a subject deeply meaningful to him. After the event, she commented, "You're not man enough to talk about feelings in front of a crowd." It rattled him not because she questioned his voice, but because she claimed to know his limits more than he did. He had a choice: engage in emotional spat or walk away. He chose serenity. He rested in the truth of his experience. He reaffirmed the value of his work privately with himself. Trusted friends, quiet acknowledgement. He didn't argue. He didn't over-explain. He didn't justify. He just reaffirmed within himself, my worth isn't determined by her judgment. If you hear you're not man enough, it's not a call to fight. It's an invitation to self-reflect. Who gives you permission to define your worth? Do you accept who you are when no one is watching or only under scrutiny? Stoic advice: self-control is strength. When your identity isn't tethered to someone else's approval, their opinions hold no power. And there's no shame in stepping away from a game you weren't made to play. You don't have to prove your manhood in someone else's theater. Your worth isn't measured by how much you can endure. Your identity isn't negotiable. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you sovereign. Because strength doesn't roar in reaction. Strength stands firm in stillness. And the most courageous step you can take is to walk away with quiet dignity. If this resonates, if you've felt the weight of words meant to control, rather than connect, don't stay in the noise. We'll explore more insights to help you live anchored, not adrift. Because here, we choose presence over provocation, clarity over conflict, peace over proving. 3. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm just being honest," and walked away from that moment feeling unexpectedly wounded? It sounds straightforward, like a badge of integrity. But let's pause and reflect. When honesty is delivered as a weapon, is it still honesty at all? I want you to imagine this. You wake up one morning, heart full of a new idea, maybe starting a creative project, exploring a new city, or making a bold life change. You share it. You sparkle with excitement. And then she looks at you, flat and steady, and says, "I'm just being honest." That sounds completely impractical. No light, no warmth, only the cold echo of her words bouncing in your chest. And just like that, you pause, you shrink. You begin to question yourself, not because you doubt the dream, but because someone called it useless, under the guise of honesty. Here's the truth. Not every honest comment is an act of sincerity. Most times, it's a shield, a way to deliver judgment while sidestepping responsibility. Psychologists call this hurt disguised as honesty. It gives someone permission to punish you emotionally, and then claim moral high ground. But the Stoics offer a different lens. Epictetus said, "What upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about them." In other words, words alone don't wound, it's how we interpret them that makes them feel like arrows. If someone uses "I'm just being honest" to undermine your goals, your beliefs, your creative life, it's not courage, it's control. Let me tell you about Kathy. She was 24, full of bold ambition, and wanted to start her own marketing agency. She told a friend, Jenna, who replied with a flat, "Honestly, who do you think you are to start something that big?" Jenna smiled. She sounded supportive. But Kathy felt herself deflating, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Weeks later, Kathy found herself in therapy, trying to rebuild that spark she lost when her dream was dismissed as unrealistic. It wasn't the intention. Kathy didn't suspect malice, but the impact was real, because words carry weight, and sometimes the heaviest are wrapped in sincerity. Neuroscience tells us that words perceived as criticism activate the same neural pathways as physical pain. A study at Carnegie Mellon University found one harsh word can elevate cortisol, the stress hormone, more than a slap to the hand. Now imagine someone firing darts of honesty masked as fact, over and over again. Each one chips away not at your dreams, but at your sense of safety. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoic minds, wrote, "If someone does wrong to you, it is because they are mistaken." He gave us the approach: receive then respond, not by echoing the hurt, but by grounding yourself in better truth. So let me ask you, have you ever agreed to step back because someone described your passion as impractical? Have you stopped sharing your ideas for fear you'd be met with cold honesty? Because if so, it wasn't harmless. It was a gateway that turns sharing into shrinking, creating into cowering, trust into anxiety, and you deserve better. Here are the steps to respond Stoic style. Notice the emotional shift: a chill, a tightness, a pause. That's your inner compass warning you. Paraphrase: reply with calm curiosity when you say that. I hear concerns, can you help me understand? Invite clarity, or a frame if they say, it's just practical. Then you respond, I understand practicality is essential, but here's why this spark matters to me. Draw your boundary if it keeps coming. Say, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm asking for support, not skepticism. Anchor in your values. Remind yourself, you're not imperfect or naive. You're human, creative, allowed to dream, and allowed to pursue that dream. This doesn't require confrontation, just clarity. You shift from victim to curator, from silence to grace. If you hold your breath when someone says, I'm just being honest, you're not alone. Many of us do. But remember, honesty isn't an excuse. It's not a free pass to wound. When someone says, I'm just being honest, here's your invitation to stand tall in truth, to love yourself enough to speak your needs clearly, and to walk away from words that chip away at your soul. Because you deserve more than statements that start with, I'm just being honest, only to end in emotional erosion. If this message resonates, know you're among friends. Click subscribe. We build a space here where dreams aren't called impractical, where clarity replaces doubt, and self-belief is welcomed home. And let's walk forward together in honesty that heals, in kindness that empowers, and in love that frees. Sometimes we forget just how powerful silence can be. Not a scream, not a raised voice, but that gentle, certain tone that says, I'm not making a fuss, but I remember it all. It's not aggressive, not explosive, just quiet. Yet the damage, it lingers, hidden beneath calm waters. Today, let's explore what lies beneath that sentence, because behind those words lives a pattern, of form of emotional leverage that keeps one person in quiet authority and someone else in perpetual caution. Imagine a chess game played with invisible pieces. Each reminder of a past mistake, apologized or unresolved, becomes a piece placed quietly on the board until they have power to checkmate you emotionally. That's emotional ledger keeping, storing every misstep, large or small, and keeping it in reserve, ready to be pulled out when control is needed. You don't burst into tears. You don't have to explain yourself. You just feel that subtle shift. Your heart tightens. Your mind goes gray. Your body says, I'm on thin ice. I want to share a story. John, a middle school teacher in his late 40s, married for over 2 decades. He once forgot a small anniversary 16 years ago. He forgot to celebrate. He brought her flowers later that week, even took her to dinner, apologized. Then years went by, until one day, during a calm conversation, she softly said, I'm not making a scene, but I still remember when you forgot our anniversary in 2008. She didn't yell. Her voice was like calm water. But when it hit him, it was as if ice formed in his chest. John told me, it felt like my past mistakes were buried with me, something buried deep and never brought to light until she chose to dig them up. That isn't trust. It isn't intimacy. It's a calm power over your psychological space. Here's what happens inside your body when you hear a calm reminder like that. A study from Carnegie Mellon University found that emotionally painful feedback triggers cortisol, your stress hormone, more than actual physical pain. Even a casual but critical remark can leave you physically tensed, quiet. Stored frustration hurts more than explosive anger because it's unpredictable and often unjustified. You can't prepare. You can't negotiate. You're left feeling guilty for something you thought was forgiven. The great Stoic thinkers Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus warned us about letting past injuries define us. Marcus said, "Reject your sense of injury and the injury itself disappears." Who sets the injury? Someone who keeps reminding you. But Stoicism offers a different view. Past mistakes are not debt, they're data, and once learned, they don't need to be endlessly repeated. Epictetus taught us, it's not events themselves that disturb us but our judgments about them. So when someone calmly reminds you of an old wrongdoing, what breaks you is not the memory, but the judgment you attach to it. Meet Sarah, a creative photographer. She once missed a cousin's birthday, nothing major, no drama. Months later, her partner said, not upset, "But I remember it." She smiled, but her words felt like shackles. Every time Sarah showed enthusiasm for her work, she'd sense judgment. A mental tally ticking dot. It didn't hit at big moments, it hit slowly, always there in subtle ways. By the end, Sarah hadn't lost the person, but she'd lost her confidence to take risks, to dream big. Here's the painful truth. Emotional ledger keeping isn't a fruit, it's a tool for power, for silence, even for punishment. Every stored mistake is a lever. And you become quieter. You adapt. You keep your dreams smaller. You speak less, smile less, take fewer chances because the cost seems high. You don't need to shout. You don't need to confront. Here's how to respond in a way that frees rather than fights. This hurts because I valued forgiveness. That's insight. I hear you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. I also believe this was healed. Instead of returning to 2008, can we focus on how to move forward? I will never forget I hurt you. I also choose to grow from that, not stay stuck. This is power. Not of control over someone else, but of ownership over your own story. A friend, David, had a heated conflict. He spoke harshly. He apologized. His partner cooled, but 6 months later, calmly reminded him. Instead of arguing, he nodded, apologized. Again, then he never brought it up again. He redirected the conversation to the present. The future is calm, and dignity said everything. It wasn't weakness. It was sovereignty. He refused to participate in the silent power play. Ask yourself, are you holding on to someone's past mistakes like weapons in your back pocket? Do you often say things like, "I'm not mad, but I remember"? Is the person saying this to you actually trying to stay in control, not just express a feeling? And most importantly, can you say to yourself, "Yeah, I remember the past, but I choose to move forward"? In Stoic terms, you can't erase the past, but you can choose not to bail water from yesterday's boat forever. You grow, you repair, you learn, and then you move forward, because that's how life works. If someone wanted to grow with you, they'd say, "I remember that mistake and how far you've come." Not, "I remember that mistake and I still hold it." Those quiet remarks aren't passive at all. They're deliberate. But you're not powerless. You own your growth. You define your forgiveness. You choose when a mistake is a lesson, not a life sentence. And you deserve to walk without fear of emotional debts that are never spent. Thank you for walking through this with me. May we all learn to forgive ourselves and others, not erase memory, but release its power. 5. Their single quotes as a phrase that sounds like a badge of honor, yet it often rings hollow. All my exes were toxic. It's repeated with conviction, sometimes with a gentle laugh. Yeah, I just can't catch a break. But beneath that laughter is a pattern and a story that rarely includes self-reflection. When someone says, "All my exes were toxic," they're telling you two things. They were always the victim. They never played a part in those toxic relationships. The implication, no need to change. Just others needed to be different. Let's pause there. If you've faced heartbreak, pain, even abuse, you deserve compassion, understanding, recovery. But saying all my exes were toxic without nuance, that's not healing. It's a cloak for one-sided judgment. This isn't romantic healing. It's emotional absolution without accountability. And that shield makes you a character in someone else's drama. Because if every relationship ended badly, maybe it's not them, maybe it's a pattern. Let me introduce you to Emily, in her early 30s, radiant in intelligence and empathy. She once told me, "My last 3 relationships were hell. Toxic, manipulative, I guess I just choose the wrong men. Pause there. Emily didn't see that she carried the same anxiety. Into each new connection, she described X after X as toxic, but saw no pattern in her own responses to conflict. Then one day, she met a gentle, secure partner. She ended it, not because he was harmful, but because he wasn't dysfunctional enough, she told me. Eyes downcast, I realized I was addicted to the drama. I missed the conflict. I thought calm meant boring. That's the core of why all my exes were toxic can be dangerous. It hides this truth. Sometimes we chase the wrong type of relationship over and over. The Stoics knew this about pain, blame, and growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." If every partner has been toxic, perhaps the lens needs cleaning. And Epictetus reminds us, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. You can't control who others are, but you can control who you become. When someone's story ends with "they were toxic," the unspoken continuation is, "I didn't learn. I didn't grow. I stayed the same." Psychological research shows labeling all exes as toxic can be a symptom of unhealed narcissism, not in the pathological sense, but in the pattern of being unable to see your role in repeated conflict. When you say they were toxic, you've given them the script and positioned yourself as faultless. When every relationship ends this way, the story becomes repetitive, and you, the central character, never change. Let me ask you, have you ever paused and thought, why did I stay when I felt tension? What patterns did I ignore? What could I have done differently? Because true healing doesn't just name those who hurt you, it includes naming the ways you contributed and choosing not to repeat those behaviors. Meet Michael, a man in his early 40s, attentive, deep, kind. He'd been in 3 relationships, each ended with him being described as too controlling, too quiet, or not spiritual enough. He said, "Yeah, those women were toxic, but honestly, I never spoke up. I never said what I needed. I walked away with all the blame because I didn't assert what I felt." Michael's realization didn't come overnight. It came after therapy helped him see he was the villager who never defended his voice. Today, he's building peace in communication, saying what matters, expressing expectations, slating relationships. Evolve has learned, not all endings are about toxicity. Some are about misalignment. Here's how to move beyond "all my exes were toxic" into something more empowering. 1. Pause and expand the story. Rewrite the narrative. I had relationships that ended painfully, and here's what I learned. To own your choices, reflect on patterns, boundaries, emotional responses. What do they say about your journey? 3. Stop glorifying drama. Real growth often looks like calm, stability over instability. 4. Seek feedback. Ask trusted friends, therapists, mentors, what could have gone differently. 5. Invite alignment. Your next relationship doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be aligned. Shared boundaries, mutual respect, thoughtful communication. Epictetus said, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought." If every thought is "I always attract toxicity," your lens distorts all new possibilities. Instead, replace it with, "I can choose partners who reflect my growth because I now know who I want to be." If you're watching this, and it hits close, know this: you deserve more than a cycle of blame. You deserve connection, not chaos. You deserve calm, but also passion. You deserve to be seen not just by others, but by yourself. So let this be your turning point. Let this phrase, "all my exes were toxic," be replaced with, "my past relationships shaped me, but they don't define me." You don't need to repeat their patterns. You don't need to hold on to their toxicity. You are more than your past. You are your next choice. 5. All my exes were toxic. It sounds definitive, sharp, final, a sentence that requires no follow-up, no reflection, no nuance. It's a declaration of innocence and a condemnation of the past, all in one breath. But what if I told you that behind those 5 words isn't closure, but a cage? See, claiming that every past partner was toxic may feel empowering, even healing, at first. It draws a clear line between you and them. It paints you as the survivor, the wrong party, the one who made it out. But here's the quiet truth: when you cast every ex as the villain, You also strip yourself of any responsibility for your own patterns, your own blind spots, your own choices. You don't just escape blame, you escape growth. Emily is 32. She's articulate, ambitious, and emotionally intelligent, at least on paper. Over coffee, she tells me her dating history. 3 serious relationships, all ended in betrayal. Every man was labeled toxic. He didn't communicate. He manipulated me. He made me feel small. I asked her, gently, "What did you learn about yourself in those experiences?" She blinked, fell silent. The question hadn't crossed her mind. She was so wrapped in their wrongdoing. She never paused to consider her own repetitions, her attraction to emotionally unavailable men, her tolerance for subtle disrespect, her silence in moments when she should have spoken. And like many of us, she mistook endurance for love, confusion for passion, and self-abandonment for loyalty. Stoicism doesn't deny suffering. It teaches us to sift meaning from it. Epictetus reminds us it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When someone constantly says, "All my exes were toxic," what they're often revealing is not the reality of those relationships, but their relationship with accountability. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is about power, reclaiming it, owning your history without rewriting it to protect your ego. Let's be clear, abuse happens. Gaslighting exists. Emotional manipulation is real. This isn't about denying legitimate harm. But when pain becomes identity, it becomes performance. When trauma is unprocessed, it becomes projection. The person who constantly repeats that everyone hurt me often carries unexamined patterns. They refuse to confront. They think they're healing by remembering, but they're reliving, rehearsing, reactivating. They don't want to move forward. They want to be validated for staying stuck. Be careful when you meet someone who paints every ex as evil and themselves as flawless. Because in that script, you're not a person. You're a placeholder. You're the next chapter in a story already written. And if the relationship fails, guess who becomes the next villain? That's the risk of loving someone who hasn't processed their past. You don't inherit their affection. You inherit their trauma and their need to make you fit a narrative that justifies their wounds. What if someone said, "I've been hurt in the past. I'm still figuring out what part one played in those dynamics. I want to learn how to do better"? That's honest. That's brave. That's rare. It takes humility to admit you were wounded, but it takes courage to admit you also had blind spots. That's the beginning of growth. Seneca taught, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And it's true. We recycle the pain, the betrayal, the insults. We carry them like armor, not realizing they're slowly rusting our ability to love. A Stoic doesn't cling to identity as the injured party. They ask, "What was mine to learn? Where did I miss the signal? Where did I betray myself?" It's not self-blame. It's self-honesty. Because the moment you start seeing the pattern, you get to break it. You normalize defensiveness. Your new partner walks on eggshells, afraid to be misunderstood. You short-circuit intimacy. Trust is replaced with testing. You filter the present through the past. Every disagreement echoes an old wound. You stop evolving. If you were always right, there's nothing to improve. You attract what you fear. If you expect betrayal, you'll unconsciously create it. A Stoic man listens when a woman tells her story, but he listens not just for pain but for patterns, not just for heartbreak but for humility, not just for victims but for vision. If her past is a theater where every man is the villain and she's always the hero, he steps back, not because he doesn't care, but because he knows that wisdom doesn't try to fix a story that was never meant to change. It's okay to say, "Some of my past relationships were toxic." That's fair. That's real. But if they all were, look again. Maybe they were, or maybe your vision was blurred by loneliness, self-abandonment, or fear of being alone. What matters most is this: can you now tell your story without bitterness? Can you speak of your past without needing to erase your part in it? Can you love again without punishing someone for what someone else did? That's the measure of growth. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to carry forward. The Stoics believed in radical ownership not as punishment, but as freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, The best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused you harm. That applies here. The best healing, not painting your exes as monsters, but becoming the kind of person who no longer attracts them. Your past is a lesson, not a legacy. Let that phrase die in silence, and let a new story begin with clarity, humility, and grace. 5. All my exes were toxic. It sounds definitive, sharp, final. A sentence that requires no follow-up, no reflection, no nuance. It's a declaration of innocence and a condemnation of the past, all in one breath. But what if I told you that behind those 5 words isn't closure, but a cage? See, claiming that every past partner was toxic may feel empowering, even healing, at first. It draws a clear line between you and them. It paints you as the survivor, the wrong party, the one who made it out. But here's the quiet truth: when you cast every ex as the villain, you also strip yourself of any responsibility for your own patterns, your own blind spots, your own choices. You don't just escape blame, you escape growth. Emily is 32. She's articulate, ambitious, and emotionally intelligent, at least on paper. Over coffee, she tells me her dating history. 3 serious relationships, all ended in betrayal. Every man was labeled toxic. He didn't communicate. He manipulated me. He made me feel small. I asked her, gently, "What did you learn about yourself in those experiences?" She blinked, fell silent. The question hadn't crossed her mind. She was so wrapped in their wrongdoing. She never paused to consider her own repetitions, her attraction to emotionally unavailable men, her tolerance for subtle disrespect, her silence in moments when she should have spoken. And like many of us, she mistook endurance for love, confusion for passion, and self-abandonment for loyalty. Stoicism doesn't deny suffering. It teaches us to sift meaning from it. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When someone constantly says, "All my exes were toxic," what they're often revealing is not the reality of those relationships, but their relationship with accountability. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is about power, reclaiming it, owning your history without rewriting it to protect your ego. Let's be clear, abuse happens. Gaslighting exists. Emotional manipulation is real. This isn't about denying legitimate harm. But when pain becomes identity, it becomes performance. When trauma is unprocessed, it becomes projection. The person who constantly repeats that everyone hurt me often carries unexamined patterns. They refuse to confront. They think they're healing by remembering, but they're reliving, rehearsing, reactivating. They don't want to move forward. They want to be validated for staying stuck. Be careful when you meet someone who paints every ex as evil and themselves as flawless. Because in that script, you're not a person. You're a placeholder. You're the next chapter in a story already written. And if the relationship fails, guess who becomes the next villain? That's the risk of loving someone who hasn't processed their past. You don't inherit their affection. You inherit their trauma and their need to make you fit a narrative that justifies their wounds. What if someone said, "I've been hurt in the past. I'm still figuring out what part 1 played in those dynamics. I want to learn how to do better"? That's honest. That's brave. That's rare. It takes humility to admit you were wounded, but it takes courage to admit you also had blind spots. That's the beginning of growth. Seneca taught, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And it's true. We recycle the pain, the betrayal, the insults. We carry them like armor, not realizing they're slowly rusting our ability to love. A Stoic doesn't cling to identity as the injured party. They ask, what was mine to learn? Where did I miss the signal? Where did I betray myself? It's not self-blame. It's self-honesty. Because the moment you start seeing the pattern, you get to break it. You normalize defensiveness. Your new partner walks on eggshells, afraid to be misunderstood. You short-circuit intimacy. Trust is replaced with testing. You filter the present through the past. Every disagreement echoes an old wound. You stop evolving. If you were always right, there's nothing to improve. You attract what you fear. If you expect betrayal, you'll unconsciously create it. A Stoic man listens when a woman tells her story, but he listens not just for pain but for patterns. Not just for heartbreak but for humility. Not just for victims but for vision. If her past is a theater where every man is the villain and she's always the hero, he steps back, not because he doesn't care, but because he knows that wisdom doesn't try to fix a story that was never meant to change. It's okay to say, some of my past relationships were toxic. That's fair, that's real. But if they all were, look again, maybe they were, or maybe your vision was blurred by loneliness, self-abandonment, or fear of being alone. What matters most is this: can you now tell your story without bitterness? Can you speak of your past without needing to erase your part in it? Can you love again without punishing someone for what someone else did? That's the measure of growth. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to carry forward. The Stoics believed in radical ownership not as punishment, but as freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused you harm." That applies here. The best healing, not painting your exes as monsters, but becoming the kind of person who no longer attracts them. Your past is a lesson, not a legacy. Let that phrase die in silence, and let a new story begin with clarity, humility, and grace. 6. If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. This version weaves philosophical insight with storytelling to reflect Stoic principles, emotional maturity, and honest introspection. We've all heard it, maybe even said it ourselves. If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. It sounds bold, empowering, like a shield for imperfection, a banner of authenticity. But behind that swagger lies a trap, the illusion that instability should be accepted as normal, and that love is conditional on chaos. Let's slow down and examine what this phrase really means and whether it honors love or excuses disruption. At first, this phrase feels like permission to be raw, unedited, imperfect. It offers a powerful reminder: we all have shadows, we all have breakdowns, and true love holds space for that. That's valid. But the issue isn't acknowledging our brokenness, it's how we frame it. When we say, "If you can't take me at my worst," we're shifting the burden to the other person. We're expecting them to absorb turbulence. Imagine a relationship as a dance. You step forward in vulnerability. They respond with understanding, and together, you find rhythm. But if one partner keeps stepping into chaos, constantly expecting the other to follow, they're no longer dancing together. They're dragging someone along. That phrase becomes less about honesty and more about emotional abdication. Consider Isabel. She's creative, magnetic, deeply emotional. She lives loudly in art, in conversation, in heartbreak. When she says, "If you can't handle me at my worst," she isn't just asking for acceptance of occasional bad moods. She's claiming normalcy for unpredictable episodes, sudden rage, guilt trips, passive aggression. Her partner, Michael, fell in love with her joy, her depth. But soon he became her emotional punch bag. Every argument was followed by a plea: "You can't see me." And if he protested, she demanded, "If you can't take this, don't deserve me." Eventually, Michael found himself walking on eggshells, fearing the next explosion, never knowing if harmony would follow anger or more storm. This isn't intimacy. It's emotional exhaustion dressed as authenticity. The Stoics measured greatness not in moments of bliss, but in responses to disruption. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you but how you react that matters." A truly powerful person can face their worst and still stand, but they don't use it as a license to break things around them. Marcus Aurelius taught that genuine virtue is stable, connected, and responsible. We don't walk into a room and demand forgiveness for every flaw. We grow toward consistency. That phrase, "if you can't handle me," implies that drama is part of your core, that anyone who demands boundaries is selfish, that instability equals depth, but real depth doesn't destabilize the people around you. A difficult morning, a moment of failure, a bad day, that's temporary tragedy. But habitual chaos? That's not a trait, it's a choice. Labels matter. If your worst self is constantly in view of anger, unpredictability, defensiveness are regular invitations, then the phrase becomes a rule, rather than a shrug of humility. It says, "Chaos is my baseline. Accept that or leave." That's not vulnerability. That's conditioning someone to expect emotional turbulence. That burden is heavy. And you can't call it love when someone is buried under your storms. Healthy partnership is like synchronized, breathing moments of calm, moments of intensity, but never constant surges or swells. In Stoicism, the word apatheia, peace of mind, underlies emotional maturity, not absence of feelings, but mastery of them. If your phrase becomes a mandate for them to hold you, pick you up, cover for you every time you're asking too much, because real empathy and care require emotional reserves, boundaries, dignity. A partner should never feel responsible for holding you together forever, because partnership thrives when to stand, not when one is forced to constantly catch the other. The phrase also risks excusing behavior rather than acknowledging it. It often crops up as, I can be explosive. You just have to love me anyway. But explosive behavior causes ripple effects, stress, confusion, distrust. When guilt follows annoyance, that's not healthy. That's emotional shifting guilt. In psychological studies on relationships, emotional unpredictability and chronic instability are strong predictors of long-term distress and burnout, not passion. Habits don't disappear with apologies. They fade when ownership replaces deflection. What if you said, I have moments of struggle. When I see them, I'm working on it. That's different. It doesn't bargain. It takes responsibility. And it invites support, not demands it. Here's the shift from, if you can't take my worst, don't deserve my best, to, I'm working on growing. If you can be patient while I do, I'd love to walk together. That changes the energy. It invites collaboration, not boxing someone into silence or endless stability. Michael once said to Isabel, I want to be there for you. But when things are explosive, I withdraw out of fear. She replied, I get that. When I'm spiraling, I do want your presence, not your silence. That dialogue was critical. It restated her rawness without weaponizing it. It welcomed understanding without weaponizing need. From then on, she learned to say, I feel tense, not I feel undone. He learned to respond with, I'm here. Do you need space or words? No one screamed deserve or can't take. Instead, they nurtured trust step by unstable step. In Stoic growth, truly acknowledging your worst means naming it. I get moody when I feel overlooked. I get anxious when connection feels shallow. I lash out when I feel powerless. When you define it, you discover its triggers. Then you transform moments from chaos into insight. You say, I notice sadness in me, not, you must sit with my sadness or belong. That's responsibility, not martyrdom. A Stoic shines light on a wound, not branded darkness. Because once you stop using chaos as a gatekeeping tool, we all win. You regain trust both from others and from within. You find equilibrium because relationships woven from mutual respect don't collapse when storms pass. You earn peace knowing your worst isn't destiny, and your best isn't hostage. By deconstructing the phrase, if you can't handle me, you don't lose authenticity. You gain accountability. Picture your relationship. A fire sits between you, not so wild it burns everything, but enough to keep you warm. Sometimes flickers, sometimes roaring gusts, but you don't insist that the whole forest burn for your heat. That's the difference. If anyone can't handle you at your worst, maybe the fault lies not in them but in the chaos you insist upon. Love is steadfastness disguised in vulnerability, not volatility dressed up as depth. So next time you feel like saying, if you can't handle me at my worst, pause, because that phrase is not humble. It's a line in the sand. Instead, ask yourself, can I handle it? Can I grow through it? Can I be honest and still build peace? Because if you can, then you don't need a shield. You just need a steady hand. Below is an approximately 1,400-word English script exploring the phrase, 7. I just wish you could read my mind. It examines the hidden expectations behind it, reframes it with emotional intelligence, and ties in Stoic insights all in a flowing narrative meant for mature, thoughtful listeners. I just wish you could read my mind. At first, it sounds romantic, like a wistful longing for deep, intuitive connection. It suggests, if you truly love me, you'll just know what I'm thinking. But here's the quiet truth. This isn't intimacy, it's emotional outsourcing, disguised as charm. Because real love doesn't come with a psychic link, it comes with words. It starts with honest communication, not telepathy. Imagine a scene. A couple sits across from each other. One is quiet, pensive, and the other waits. Finally, she says with a small sigh, "Why can't you just know what's on my heart?" He feels the pressure, something unsaid, urgent, important, but he's watching her, waiting, guessing. He wonders, is she sad, angry, needs space, needs reassurance? He wants to understand, but unless she speaks, he's tangled in her silence, and she feels he must be missing something, that he should be intuitive enough, that in a well-tuned couple, words aren't needed. But that fantasy and inhibited understanding is exactly that, a fantasy. Let's talk about Mia. Creative, introspective, longing to be known. David, warm-hearted but more pragmatic. Mia often says, "I just want you to get me without me saying anything." When David doesn't respond as she hopes, she withdraws. He gets confused, frustrated. She reasons, he should just know. But what he hears is, "You failed me, you didn't show up." So he responds by shutting down a little more. They drift, silently. The problems grow in the quiet. Researching communication shows that assumption kills connection. When you expect someone to just know, you skip vulnerability, don't name your feelings. You create a silent hierarchy where one partner is mind reader, the other is blamed. You trap them in the vague zone, "You don't get me." And this breeds resentment because silence is fertile ground for disappointment. Stoicism emphasizes clarity and responsibility in how we relate to others. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is wrong, I will change." But that only works when there is clear communication, when assumptions aren't allowed to masquerade as love. Epictetus reminded, the essence of character is doing the right thing even in the small stuff. And so the small stuff, the unsaid, the unexpressed matters as much as the grand gestures. Expecting someone to read your mind is a refusal to do the smallest moral work. Speak up. Let's be honest, it's not love, it's power. When someone demands that unspoken understanding, they're testing. Did you notice me? They're controlling. If you loved me, you'd know. They shield themselves. I don't have to say, but I'll punish you for not knowing. It's emotional manipulation. Hidden, gentle but still coercive. Let's reimagine what could be said. Instead of "I wish you could read my mind," try this: "I want you to know what's going on with me." So I'll try to say it. Notice the shift. From "you should guess" to "I'll tell you." You're not asking them to be prophets, you're inviting them to witness you. Picture it, Mia says, "I'm feeling disconnected. I want to talk, not well just to share what's on my mind." David responds, "Thank you for saying that. I'm listening." No telepathy, no frustration. Just openness. First step. They trade silence for curiosity. In Stoicism, premeditation means preparing your mind for recurring emotional challenges. So when a partner usually sulks in silence, you can prepare to speak. Today, when I feel him withdrawing, I'll say, "Something's up, can we talk?" And you'll prepare yourself mentally. If he tries to guess my mood, I'll say directly. Small acts of clarity, not control, not mind games, just honesty. Here's what happens when you break the silence. You reduce pressure. He no longer has to guess if she's upset. You build trust. She feels safe enough to share vulnerable thoughts. You increase psychological safety, because feeling unseen is the opposite of love. Being seen through words that starts to heal. Marcus Aurelius said, "Nothing happens to anyone which he cannot endure." Part of enduring life is speaking your needs. Another part is listening with grace. So you hold to truths. I am responsible for telling you what matters to me. You are responsible for listening, but not mind reading. That's equitable. That's mature. That's love as partnership. Let them teach us. Mia begins. David, "I've been quieter lately. It's not you. I'm feeling overwhelmed." David, "I'm here. You can tell me what's heavy." Silence breaks, not conquered, not avoided. It becomes a shared moment. They exchange truth instead of guessing games. That's a freedom worth more than assumed intimacy. When you say, "I just wish you could read my mind," you hand control away. You build resentment on silence. But when you say, "I'll tell you what's inside, can you listen?" you reclaim your voice, your agency, your connection. It's not less romantic. It's more honest. It's not easy. It's intentional. And it honors both hearts equally. So next time you feel that pull, wanting someone to read you, pause. Because maybe what you really need is not to be understood by default, but to speak your truth and invite someone in. That's intimacy that stands, grows, and endures. That's love rooted in clarity, not confusion. 8. I know my worth. At first glance, it sounds empowering, doesn't it? A declaration of confidence. A woman who knows herself, stands her ground, and refuses to settle. And when it's rooted in truth, it's beautiful. But I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where that phrase felt off? Where I know my worth didn't feel like strength, but like a wall? You see, true self-worth whispers. It's quiet, consistent, unshaken. But often when someone keeps shouting about their value, what you're really hearing is fear dressed up as confidence. And more often than not, that fear becomes control. I remember a story about a man named Thomas, 62, soft-spoken, former engineer. He met a woman in a grief support group. She was sharp, articulate, and self-assured. She often said things like, "I don't tolerate disrespect, I know my worth." At first, it was admirable. He admired her standards. But over time, he noticed a pattern. Anytime he disagreed with her, even gently, she would recoil and say, "Wow, I guess you don't respect me." If he ever asked for clarity or expressed his own needs, it would be met with, "I don't need this, I know my worth." And slowly, Thomas found himself walking on eggshells. Not because he was disrespectful, but because the relationship had no room for two people with equal voices. Only one person's worth was allowed in the room. It's subtle. That's what makes it dangerous. Because the phrase "I know my worth," when used as a tool for self-awareness, builds healthy boundaries. But when used as a weapon, it becomes a tactic to shut down growth, silence feedback, and demand compliance. The Stoics warned us of this. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." And Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. Sometimes, the loudest declarations are the least rooted in reflection. And here's the deeper truth: many people, not just women, use this phrase to avoid vulnerability. Because true self-worth requires humility. It says, "I know my value, and I'm still learning." But false self-worth says, "I'm done learning." The problem is you. When someone uses "I know my worth" to deflect from every conversation, critique, or emotional moment, they're not demonstrating confidence. They're avoiding accountability. Let's imagine this in a different context. Imagine you're a craftsman. You've built a table strong, elegant, made with care. When you walk into a room, you don't need to yell, "This is a quality table." You let people experience it. It speaks for itself. That's how true self-worth works. It's lived, not announced. But what happens when the table keeps falling apart and someone keeps screaming, "It's expensive"? Okay, it's high quality. You start to realize the price tag doesn't match the integrity. And that's the dynamic many people miss. Because some women will use this phrase, "I know my worth," to justify inflexibility, to avoid hard conversations, to demand your silence and your sacrifice. Not because they're cruel, but because somewhere along the line, they learned that value equals power, and power equals control. But the Stoic man, he knows better. He knows that a healthy relationship doesn't require one person to shrink so the other can feel big. He understands that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of clarity. So when a woman says, "I know my worth," he listens closely. He listens for tone, for pattern, for whether those words invite growth or shut it down, whether she's open to mutuality or just wants obedience. He doesn't argue. He doesn't lecture. He simply aligns himself with truth. Because for the Stoic man, discernment is more powerful than debate. Let me share something personal. I once dated a woman, let's call her Rachel. She was magnetic, driven, and brilliant. And she knew it. At least, she said she did. Every conversation about vulnerability ended the same way: "I'm not changing. I know my worth." At first, I admired her. But then I noticed she never apologized, never asked questions, never said, "Tell me more." Over time, I felt less like a partner and more like an audience. Her worth demanded attention. It didn't welcome connection. And I'll be honest, it hurt. Because I wanted to grow together. But growth requires honesty, not just slogans. Rachel wasn't evil. She was scared. Somewhere in her life, she'd been undervalued. And instead of healing that, She built a fortress and plastered a banner across the front. I know my worth. But even the strongest walls collapse when no one is allowed inside. So if you're a man watching this and you've heard those words, ask yourself, does this woman's worth make you feel more seen or more silenced? Do you feel invited into her world or pushed out unless you agree? Do you feel like her value shines from within? Or does she hold it like a sword, ready to strike the moment you offer feedback? Because real love, real connection requires mutual reflection. And true worth doesn't fear being seen. It welcomes it. In the end, the Stoics had it right. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. True worth is lived, day by day, in how we speak, how we listen, how we love. And anyone who truly knows their worth, they don't have to remind you. You feel it. And when you feel it, there's no control, no coercion, no fear. Just respect, balance, and peace. 9. I don't need a man. It sounds bold, defiant, empowered, like a rallying cry for independence. And maybe at some point in history, it needed to be. But when those 5 words show up not as a celebration of strength, but as a weapon against connection, something deeper is happening. I've heard that phrase from women who were hurt, women who were abandoned, women who gave everything, only to watch it be dismissed, betrayed, or taken for granted. So they built something strong, something they could control themselves. They swore they would never need anyone again. And I understand that. I really do. But here's the quiet tragedy no one talks about. When strength turns into a fortress, nothing gets in. Not love, not truth, not the gentle kind of intimacy that only grows when we admit we don't have it all figured out. I once knew a woman named Ellen. She was in her late 50s, ran her own business, owned her home, raised 2 children on her own. On paper, she was the definition of success. But emotionally, she kept everyone at a distance. The moment a man showed interest, even kindly, she'd say it with a smile and a sip of wine. I don't need a man. It wasn't bitterness in her voice, it was pride. But under that pride was a tiredness I could feel, a part of her that longed to be held, not out of weakness, but out of the simple human desire to be seen. Because independence is beautiful, but isolation disguised as empowerment is lonely. Stoic philosophy reminds us that self-sufficiency is noble, but not at the cost of shutting out growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "We were born for cooperation." That doesn't mean dependency. It means harmony, interdependence, knowing how to carry ourselves and still allowing others to walk beside us. The truth is, needing someone doesn't make you weak, but fearing that need, that's a wound. And when a woman uses "I don't need" a man as her default answer to connection, it's not because she's invincible, it's because she's tired of being disappointed. It's not power, it's protection. But protection that becomes permanent becomes a prison. Imagine a garden, surrounded by walls so high that not even the sun gets through. No pests, sure, but no nourishment either. That's what emotional self-containment can become. Safe, but slowly starving. And here's what often happens to the man who hears those words. He respects them, maybe too much. He backs off. He doesn't offer his presence. He doesn't risk reaching out. And so the cycle continues to people circling each other, both craving connection, neither willing to admit it. I want to be clear, there's a difference between being emotionally healthy and being emotionally closed. A woman who says "I don't need a man" with a smile and a wall isn't dangerous. She's scared. Scared of repeating patterns. Scared of trusting too soon. Scared that if she lets someone in, she'll lose herself. But the irony is true connection doesn't require you to lose yourself. It requires you to reveal yourself, piece by piece at your own pace. There's a quiet kind of strength in saying, "I've been through enough to stand on my own, but I'm still open." That's the woman who's done the real work, who knows that intimacy isn't a transaction, it's a risk. And that risk doesn't come from need. It comes from courage. The Stoic man doesn't try to fix this dynamic. He doesn't chase or plead. He listens, observes, and decides whether the space is open or closed. He knows that if someone defines themselves by what they reject, they haven't yet defined what they're truly seeking. And he doesn't confuse resistance with power. He knows that softness is not a weakness, it's a choice. The bravest choice, sometimes. Because here's the hard truth. when someone says I don't need a man over and over. What they're really saying is I've stopped believing a man could be good for me. And that belief, if never challenged, becomes prophecy. So, to the men watching this, don't internalize her wall as a reflection of your worth. Her pain is not your invitation to bleed for her. Her story is not yours to rewrite, but it is yours to discern. And to the women watching, if those words have ever come out of your mouth, I ask you gently, do you still believe them? Or have they simply become armor? You don't need a man. That's not the point. The point is whether you're still open to love in all its honest, messy, transformative glory. Because needing someone doesn't mean losing yourself. It means trusting that you can be whole on your own, and still welcome someone who sees that wholeness, and says, I'm here, not to fix it, but to honor it. True connection doesn't require collapse. It requires space for two people to stand side by side, not leaning, not clinging, just choosing, not because they need to, but because they want to. And in that space, magic happens. Some of the most common phrases spoken by women, I'm just being honest, I don't need a man, I know my worth, if you can't handle me at my worst, may sound like confidence, empowerment, or bold authenticity. But behind many of these words lies something else entirely. Pain masked as pride, fear dressed up as strength, and subtle manipulation wrapped in charm. The Stoic philosophy doesn't ask us to judge these women. It asks us to discern clearly, respond wisely, and protect our peace without apology. A Stoic man doesn't react to provocation, he sees it for what it is. He doesn't stay in chaos to prove he's strong. He steps away to preserve his clarity. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You are not responsible for fixing someone's emotional immaturity. You are responsible for guarding your soul. And when someone's words become weapons, used to provoke, confuse, or keep you in constant emotional debt, it's not your job to heal them, it's your responsibility to walk away with wisdom. This isn't about being cynical, it's about being clear. Join a community of modern Stoic thinkers, those who believe in self-mastery, silent strength, and meaningful connection. Subscribe to the channel if you're ready to stop reacting and start leading your life with purpose, poise, and peace. Thank you for watching.